Welcome to PechaKucha Brisbane tonight. If you haven't joined us before, PechaKucha simply means the sound of chit-chat. Basically, it's a simple presentation of 20 slides over 20 seconds each. So you say what you need to in 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and then you're off. So it was all started by two architects, Astrid Klein and Mark Dytham, in Tokyo in 2003. They realized that passionate, creative people have a habit of talking too much, so they devised a new kind of presentation to put an end to architects babbling on. What's fantastic is that it's a global event with a local spin. So it's now in over 1,000 cities across the world, and there are nights like this that showcase the best designers and creatives of a city. If you have a story to tell, we'd love to see you up here on the stage in the future. So either come and see myself or Chris, who you'll see later tonight, and we'll get the ball rolling. Before we begin, a big thank you to our sponsors that make this night happen. The Brisbane Powerhouse has been a main supporter right from the beginning. They give us a permanent home to host these events. We also have Conrad Gargett and Brickworks to thank for support. This event is presented as part of the Asia Pacific Architecture Festival, and we're very grateful to be collaborating with QAGOMA tonight. So tonight, focusing on the theme of water, responding directly to QA's exhibition, which is on display until the 26th of April. So they have major immersive experiences to smaller scale treasures by Australian international artists. The water exhibition highlights the precious resource and aims to spark conversations on the environment and social challenges faced by the world today. And tonight we'll hear from several speakers with a range of backgrounds and approaches to design that'll respond and discuss how water relates to and informs their work. So let's jump in. First up, we have Natasha Edwards. She's a curator of temporary public artworks and exhibitions, renowned for her vision and curation of the SWELL Sculpture Festival for 18 years that connects people, art and place. An avid sailor, competing in 3 Sydney to Hobart yacht races and trans-Tasman crossings, Natasha will discuss how the sea has no walls. Please welcome Natasha.
Good evening, good people. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. As the lead curator and a co-founder of the SWELL Sculpture Festival, I've been presenting exhibitions for this will be my 18th year, and I have 2 great passions, one being SWELL Sculpture Festival and the other being sailing. As an avid sailor and working and curating sculpture by the sea, it's something that has transformed my life, and also I've seen it transform artists' life, and for them to be able to tell their stories. Lighthouses to me have such different meanings. When you're out at sea and it's really rough, it's like this symbol that you're coming home. And when you're racing, you always know that there's this great place that's going to keep you warm in your belly and keep you safe. The competition is no different to curating an exhibition in the way that we put together a fantastic team, and the artists are all vying for a great love and a great passion to share their stories. Any opportunity that I have spare when I'm not working on the exhibition or spending time with family, I'm out at sea. And it's a real place for me to connect with nature on all different levels. I've had a great passion for the sea since I was a little girl, and also for boats, and a great respect for our coastline. We get to enjoy these beautiful sunsets and sunrises, and they're different all the time. At SWELL, it's a playground for us to exhibit our works and to share our passions with other people. And when you're on a big crossing, this is out crossing the Tasman Sea over to New Zealand. I just come off a 3-hour shift all on my own. And the sunrises are equally as beautiful out there. And it gives me a time to reflect on my artwork and what needs to happen, and the curation of the SWELL exhibition. Working by the sea, by the ocean, we have our own challenges, and all of the artists, they work with us to overcome the many challenges that we have. We have to look at tides and winds and loadings. And of course, when I'm out at sea, this is all I've got. If I fall off the edge of the boat, this is what's going to, hopefully someone's going to come back and get me and bring me back home. There's nothing glamorous about sailing. They all think it's all about champagne and just sitting there. It's actually quite a lot of work, but the adrenaline is just, mind-blowing. And then I have the opportunity to work and engage in other temporary public artworks where we change the landscape, and using sculpture as a medium, we're able to have a bit of fun. These are like old buildings in Surfers Paradise that have been taken over. And then, of course, when you have the opportunity to go to other sculpture exhibitions, and then sailing over to New Zealand, I was able to then go and experience this amazing Gibbs farm. And you see these large-scale monumental artworks, and they're, so awe-inspiring. And when you're working with artists and trying to convey those ideals, and of course, coming back, there's all these responsibilities that we have, within our society, and also thinking about the environment and protecting and educating people through those challenges that we have. This particular artwork was made from 3,000 coffee pods. What happens to those coffee pods afterwards? It takes 30 seconds. And when you have an opportunity to work with artists, you get to tell their stories as well. Currumbin's a very beautiful place. It's where fresh water meets salt water. This is the Currumbin Creek, and it's an opportunity for us to work with the bridges and projection art, and seeing the beautiful reflections. Obviously, the bridges are connecting different communities together. So here I am, wild and woolly, out on the about to head into Tassie, and I'm absolutely blown away. This is a Sydney to Hobart race, and I'm sitting there with one of those yellow hats on, and this excitement that just goes in my belly. It's just like, it's mind-blowing. And this is nature. This is sculpture. This is where many of us draw inspiration. When I come around the headlands, I'm totally in awe of the beauty, and it inspires so much in me. It gives me a sense of calm. Underneath the sea also has so many other beautiful creatures. So here we have the bioluminescence and dolphins that swim alongside the boat, the yachts, and honestly they look like shooting stars underneath the sea. And of course, like the lighthouse, when it just brings me back home. And I come back and I sit here on the beach, and I feel this sort of calling coming, saying to come back out to sea. But we also have to show our respect of our cultures and our people. Luther Cora, who's a great mentor and a great friend, totally inspired by these stories that he's able to share about the sea and his totems and his journeys as well. And we have to take all those inspirations with us when we go. One of the things that people say to me, or if I'm talking to artists, they like to hear about my journeys out at sea. And when I'm talking to sailors, they love to hear about my life as a curator and what all the artists are doing. So it's a lovely way to blend both together. Thank you.
Next up, we have Warwick Bowen. Warwick's a professor at the University of Queensland and leads the Quantum Optics Laboratory. Relating to water, the turbulence of oceans and cyclones is one of the oldest problems in physics, and his lab builds quantum technologies to study it on a silicon chip. The title of his talk is Storms in a Quantum Teacup. Thanks, Warren.
We all experience turbulence and fluid dynamics in our day-to-day life, from the lift that allows flight, to waves crashing at a beach, to the storms that we came through to get here today, and more extreme storms such as hurricanes and cyclones. Indeed, Turbulence even exists off this planet. So the Great Red Spot of Jupiter is a massive turbulent storm larger than the Earth that's existed for hundreds of years. And recently, the NASA Juno probe has seen very intricate turbulence that exists at the poles of Jupiter. Turbulence, indeed, has been recognized as one of the grand challenges of energy by the US Department of Energy, because turbulence is required, understanding of turbulence is required to understand climate and therefore climate change, and also how you might extract energy out of the climate with clean energy systems. The equations for turbulence were written down by Euler in the 18th century by taking ideas of Newton's about how apples fall from a tree and applying them into liquids. Remarkably, however, we still don't understand turbulence. It is the last remaining grand challenge in classical physics. We don't understand even whether those equations have a solution or whether that solution is unique. If you could answer these questions, you'd win $1 million, the Millennial Prize, which has existed for about 20 years. About 50, 60 years ago, I guess, Lars Onsager came up with an unusual proposal for how you might understand turbulence, and that was to apply ideas from quantum physics to simplify the mathematics of turbulence. You may understand that atoms, because of their quantum nature, emit light only at very specific frequencies. Well, it turns out that liquids, when they're quantum liquids can only flow with very specific velocities. And that completely changes their physics in ways that surprisingly simplify turbulence. Here I'm showing you a quantum liquid, if you like, which shows these strange defects that appear, and they're called quantum vortices. They're like little tornadoes that all are exactly identical, and the turbulence is encoded in the motion of those tornadoes. In 2016, the Nobel Prize in Physics was given out for some theory involving these quantum vortices and the potential impact that they will have on future materials, quantum materials, and quantum technologies. In my lab, we have developed the first system in the world that is able to confine quantum liquids on a very small scale and watch this turbulence as it occurs in a liquid. This is how we do it. So this is a micro-scale device. It's a little device. It confines a laser field, and we coat it with a quantum liquid. That's the blue stuff. You might ask, how do we do this? So the fabrication is using the kind of techniques you use in computer chip fabrication. And to make the quantum liquid, we put that device in a box of helium gas in a refrigerator, which is Australia's coldest fridge. It gets down to 1/100 of a degree absolute zero, so about as cold as you could possibly imagine. And when that happens, the gas liquefies into a quantum liquid, superfluid helium. Then, if we fire a laser in to this system, then it puts energy in and creates a turbulent quantum evolution, quantum dynamics, which is this turbulence we want to study. The challenge is, how do you measure it? It turns out that quantized vortices have a size about the same as an atom. So now we need to measure that very small thing. We do that using ripples, like ripples on a pond, sound waves that also exist on this device that we put in our fridge. You can understand how that works. It's through the Doppler effect. So if you've ever stood underneath a plane and listened to the frequency of sound as it goes past, you hear it shift. Well, it turns out these vortices create a flow, and that shifts the frequency of these ripples on our disk. And that allows us to, for the first time, resolve the motion of quantized vortices in a liquid on a chip. And this is, let's call it an artist's rendition of what that might look like. What we're now able to do is create clusters of these strange quantum vortices and watch them as they move around over time on a chip in a lab. So why would you care? Well, one reason, hopefully, I've convinced you that this is an important fundamental problem. We can now take something like a cyclone or a tornado and map the dynamics of that system onto a chip in a lab and start asking the questions of the fundamental dynamics of turbulence. But there are also applications. So one application is in accelerometers. So if you're on a plane or any sort of mobile vehicle, then it has accelerometers that tell it how it's moving. And the best ones are made from lasers. But we all know that if you point a laser up, it doesn't come down. And that tells you that photons and lasers do not interact strongly with gravity and therefore don't interact strongly with accelerations. Atoms, when we throw them up, come down. And that means they interact strongly with accelerations. That means, put very simply, that it is in principle possible that we can build, using our technology, accelerometers that are 1 billion times more sensitive than the best state-of-the-art laser-based accelerometer. So hopefully next time I talk to you, I'll tell you about that. Thank you.
Next up, we have Megan Franks and David Kay. David Kay is the leading hand at QAGOMA with over 11 years' experience in the construction and installation of art exhibitions at a variety of scales. Together with Megan Franks, who is an architect and lead exhibition designer on the water exhibition, they will discuss how QAGOMA were able to make the riverbed come to life. Please welcome them.
Inserting a slice of a riverbed into a 640 square metre gallery, real rocks, running water, and a sense of daylight. The feasibility for this project started 1.5 years before the opening of this exhibition to ensure that we could actually build it and build it to budget. Working with the Elias studio in Berlin via Skype, them bright as a button in the morning and us wary in the afternoons, we worked through all of the design considerations and made sure that we crossed everything off to make sure that when we built it, we didn't have any issues. We used Revit and 3D topographies to ensure this. Previously, the exhibition was shown using Icelandic rocks. Obviously, we wanted ours to be sustainable, so the rocks came from Australia and Asia Pacific. There's 132 tonne to be exact, and there's a baked tennis court sand that we use so that it's non-toxic for interaction with people. They all came in, the rocks and the sand, in 1 tonne bulk bags, so we worked with structural engineers to ensure that the building was adequate to actually hold these bags, and they were brought in over the space of 5 days to coincide with the very strict build that we had on site. The lighting is to replicate daylight, so that's 4,000 lux. To put that in perspective, gallery lighting is between 50 to 200 lux. So we worked with a lighting engineer to prefabricate these sunlight systems that were attached to the ceiling and didn't affect the services.
Prefabrication was key as the build program was only 6 weeks, and this also included other water-related works. The structure was broken down into zones, wall, rows, and from left to right. All components were pre-cut and stacked and stored ready for on-site use. The construction was broken down into stages with staggered starts for each trade. Lighting and electrical was first, followed by painting and plastering, and then the construction of the contour frames. All the frames were assembled with the contour beams screwed to the top edge, stood, straightened and secured before the next one was stood. 10 had to be stood per day to keep up with Megan's schedule.
I'm a hard taskmaster.
Here you see the strip flooring being laid to the top edge of all those contours, 30,000 batten screws in total, holding it all down. In some areas the contour was so steep that the plywood actually lifted the supporting frames up off the floor. It was then sanded, ready for the waterproofing. In some areas, as I said, the contour was so steep that the work was very hard and backbreaking for some of the guys, and the riverbed angles continuously changed, keeping the guys confused and guessing the whole time, as you can see. Here is the waterproofing vinyl membrane that was laid. Some areas of the riverbed were so steep that conduits had to be welded in to keep the rocks and gravel onto the structure and didn't slide down it. A thick black geotech membrane was then laid ahead of mobile conveyor belts being brought in to move the material up the hill. It was machine loaded at the base, travelled to the top and then hand unloaded and spread by all of our fantastic labour. This is the underside of the structure, 88 frames in total, with 2 catwalks built to allow for inspections, as well as 2 leak detection systems installed, one of which was tied into the pump system. The pump system, the reticulation system included 3 pumps in total, 1 supply pump, 2 return pumps, 2 pool filters, 1 water purification system, 3 overflow pipes, and 2 2,000-litre water tanks, which is not in this image beside it. I like this image as it depicts well the situation. The big metal sump came late in the build program. We weren't sure how it was going to fit, and alterations had to be made to the structure to ensure it would fit and that it was still waterproof.
So a large part of our major installations is that we build one-to-one prototypes to work through any sort of unforeseen issues that might happen before we're on site. So this is a one-to-one of the steepest gradient within the riverbed. So we did add some additional profiles in there to stop the rocks from drifting down the hill. It also enabled us to relook at the profile of the river itself. So previously, it had some quite sharp corners, and we reiterated that into quite a smooth situation, which meant that the waterproofing didn't have any sharp edges and thus less leak capacity. We also had to deal with the building services. So the air conditioning for the gallery all comes from the floor space. So we have a profiled vent around the perimeter to allow that airflow through. And also fire extinguishers were held within the built cavity spaces of the new walls that we have in the exhibition. It's quite a lengthy bit of process of workshop every day, spending an hour and a half making sure there's no dams and that the rocks are actually all in place and in the right position. And it's with such a great team here at QAGOMA that we're able to actually fulfill such a large, ambitious project of this kind. And in the words of Oliver Eliasson, he sees the artist as a participant, a co-producer of reality. And in us bringing together his vision, we became a part of his artwork. Thank you.
Next up is Rebecca Olive. She's an ARC Research Fellow in Cultural Studies of Sport at UQ. Using feminist theory, she will explore how ocean sports help us develop relationships with coastal ecologies. The title of her talk is Moving Oceans, Making Kin Through Sport. Please welcome Rebecca.
So I know we acknowledge traditional owners here in Brisbane, but I want to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Arakwal people in Bundjalung country where I grew up and where this project was really conceived and where it's really from. I feel really lucky to know this place and to still be able to return there and to know it's taken such good care of. This is me surfing. So I study recreational lifestyle sports, which are individual sports that people do for fun, mostly, but also they involve a lot of skill. And I tend to study the cultural politics of these sports, and I focused on women in surfing. And to study surfing, I do it, which is great. This has brought me to my latest project, this one, Moving Oceans, which is trying to understand not only the politics amongst people, but the politics of how we develop relationships to places and what those relationships produce. So if we care about the places, do we do anything to take care of them? And this is important because at the moment we talk a lot about how good oceans are for us. They're very good for us. So being in them, being near them, and even just looking at images of them is excellent for our health. But what do we do in return? They're so good for us, but are we any good for them? And I'm really interested in how doing sport in the ocean brings us into encounter with different materials, with different animals and plants, with plastics and pollution, with other people, with elements as well. These are really special moments in the sea, and everyone will be able to have sort of descriptions about those kind of moments. And they do produce things, we think. There's lots of evidence of surfers and swimmers being really active around collecting plastics and protesting deep sea mining, and even oceanographer Sylvia Earle has recognised that there's something about the intimacy of the relationship we get through doing sport, being immersed in and moving through spaces that produces something in us or activates something in us. So I'm still studying surfing. This isn't me, sadly. And surfing's really interesting sport because it takes a long time to get any good at it at all. If anyone surfs, you know that's true. And you have to develop a particular kind of place-based literacy. So you have to be able to read waves and water and weather as well. And I'm also studying ocean swimming, the other sport I'm looking at, which is growing hugely in popularity. It can be done on your own or in groups. This is the Bold and the Beautiful group in Manly. And it's super immersive. So you're really vulnerable when you do it. And any encounter you have makes you feel really small. And I wanted to acknowledge the theories I'm using to develop these ideas, which are ecofeminist. And ecofeminism troubles traditional Western philosophies that separate human from nature. Indigenous and First Nations people and lots of other cultures don't have a problem thinking this way. But for those of us from European cultures, it can be tough. And so as swimmers and surfers, one of the encounters we might have or fear of having is sharks. And so I'm interested in what that fear means in our life and how we come to manage it. So sharks are there, they're in their element, we're out of ours. And what are we willing to give? Are we willing to give them up in order to do our sport? There's lots of activism against shark existence when someone gets killed or is attacked, so there's lots of calls for culls or nets, but there's also lots of calls about we're in their space and they should be able to exist. So there's two different takes on that. But there's lots of collateral damage, collateral life loss that happens through nets. And this is contradictory because one of the joys of doing sport in the ocean is these encounters that people have, the unexpectedness of it and the sense of vulnerability and risk that comes with it too, and the way that we become a species in an ecology rather than being dominant in it. This requires us to feel super vulnerable, and this is part of ecofeminist theory, is to say that to deal with risky situations we have to be vulnerable. And Donna Haraway talks about this in terms of making kin with other species, so thinking of them as our family and as part of our worlds and ecologies rather than us dominating them and managing them. Another thing that we come into encounter with a lot in oceans is plastics. And my work on ocean plastic activism is building on Cliff Evers' work on polluted leisure. And he says that we have to learn to deal with and adapt to plastics as part of our worlds because it's there, it's not going away. And surfers and swimmers seem to be pretty activist in this area because it hits you in the face a lot. But I'm interested in the unequal nature of the labour around cleaning this up. And so I think of toxicity as gendered. So I'm interested in how our masculinity and femininity, I know that's quite binary, apologies, comes into play here. And I'm looking at women's work around this. So plastic-free periods is my favourite movement. And that's a pretty intimate change that women are making to adapt to climate change, to adapt to these kind of like getting rid of the capitalist excess of our lives. And there's great imagery that comes with it too, which is really fun to work with. And my final case study on my project is crowds. These are popular sports, people like going to the beach, but who gets to claim authority over these spaces and who feels the most sense of entitlement to speak for their well-being? In Australia, that tends to a lot of the time be white settlers, and we'll talk about ourselves as being local and having authority to places. This is where I live, or where I grew up. And this is obviously hugely problematic because it continues narratives of colonisation, practices of colonisation. It ignores Indigenous knowledges and authorities over place, and it pushes aside Indigenous leadership on taking care of places. But it also leaves out multicultural newcomers as not being able to speak for how we take care of places, and it claims them for our own. We want it to be this way. We'll tell you how it should be cared for, and surfers are terrible at that, and I'm a surfer, so I know. But if oceans are so good for us, then we should be encouraging more people to be around them. And oceans are so good for our health, incredibly good for our health. And so my project's really concerned with how we can be better for them. And I think that sport and physical activity and being in oceans is one way that we can make better kin with our ocean ecologies. Thank you.
So I started off my life as an electrical engineer in the Australian Defence Force Academy. Many years later and quite a few jobs later, I ended up somehow working for one of the big four accounting firms in the economics and regulation section. Regulation's as exciting as it sounds, by the way. We were helping utility companies, so the water and electricity companies, respond to regulatory changes. Now, one of our clients was Queensland Urban Utilities, and they were running a hackathon. We thought, this is great, put a team together and go in there and solve some problems. They presented us with 3 problems at this hackathon, and the idea was you've got a weekend to try to solve this problem. As a team, we looked at these problems and thought, they don't really gel with us. We don't quite like the ones they've given, so we're going to hack the hackathon. We did a bit of research and we found out that about 20% of extracted water is lost during transportation from the leaks and bursts in pipes. They're underground, you can't tell the condition of them, and it's kind of hard to know where they are. So, we thought we were onto something big here. All the maintenance people in the audience, they were nodding and smiling. Yeah, you guys got this great. The judges, they slammed us. They didn't like it. And we lost to a team that worked out to use recycled water to make beer, which is poo beer. But anyway, we carried on. We weren't going to be disheartened by that. And we made a very sophisticated test rig in our backyard of one of my co-founders, very sophisticated. And we tried to enter another competition. And this competition actually saw us get a plane trip to India as part of it. 3 days before the event, the plane tickets hadn't arrived, but we held true to the mission and off we went. We were on our way to Bangalore. We presented there and we thought we did pretty well at that event, but there wasn't any announcement. They just sort of shuffled us off to the airport and that was the end of that. But we spent 3 days in India and it was just opened our mind to things. So they lose about 70% of the water in transportation. They lose so much from people smashing the water pipes to drink from it that they turn the water off and only allow the water to flow maybe 1 day a week. And this also leads to a whole heap of sanitation issues, which is just totally different. We did a lot of work in the lead up to the India presentation, and when we got back, we decided to present some of our findings to Queensland Urban Utilities to still give them some confidence that we're moving along and we've got this thing and off we go. But our costs were starting to build up because this was just a hobby for us. We're just playing around in our backyard doing things. So we entered another competition and it paid dividends. We got the large oversized novelty check, came second place in a little talking event, and that was enough to actually build at what's known as our minimum viable product. We could actually take a device and have something and say, yes, this is it, off we go. And yeah, so we kept going with things, we kept testing, and we got told that we're actually in a final for the India competition, and now we're off to Birmingham. We went to the UK and we won. This is us with a big bottle of Magnum champagne. That was pretty cool. While we were there, we got to meet the mayor of the Western Midlands, and he was telling us that the water authority there, they got about 5 times the amount of pipes as Queensland Urban Utilities, in about the same sort of area as what they've got, but they got some of the oldest infrastructure in the world. So they were pretty excited by our idea, which was really encouraging for us. We decided that, hey, we're just a bunch of eggheads and economists trying to tinker away at this. We need a bit of structure. So we'll enter into what's known as an accelerator, a structured program to help you off. But it turned out the day I landed back in Australia, I had to pitch for the event to get in. We got in and it required us to commit 5 days a week for 3 months to the program. But we've all still got full-time jobs. So, wife, kids, mortgage, I dropped the corporate life and I've gone head first into this now. what can possibly go wrong? We got some winnings from our money, and it's only going to be 3 months, right? And that was about 12 months ago. So that's, my helper, number one helper there, my kid, helping us do this. So during the accelerator, we accelerated, we got the device working, and we convinced Queensland Urban Utilities to allow us to do a trial in the Brisbane network. And they said yes, and off we went. A day or two before the trial, we had a catastrophic failure of our device, and it just was not going to work. So we had to fundamentally alter some significant portions of our device because we had to make this work. I left my job, we've stopped, put everything on hold, it has to work. And so after some changes, yes, the results came in, and they agreed that our device was actually very impressive. It was working better than some of the things in the market to date. And as you can see, we made this in the backyard. It's not high tech at all, but it's got a lot of smarts behind it. We're also getting a bit of attention now from some entities, and what it would mean is I'd have the high vis on in a hole or in the side of the road doing some work, and then I'd have to get up and go and do a podcast or a speaking event and then jump back in a hole with the high vis and balancing all the life of the startup from there. One of the greatest opportunities that was presented to me was from Advance Queensland. It was a partially funded trip to go to Israel and Tel Aviv to attend an international water conference. So Israel is just a hub for water technology. The country is 60% desert, but they have so efficient use of water and water technology, they export this to the tune of about $3 billion a year. It's mind-blowingly awesome going there and just seeing their attitude. So what we've got is we've got this sensor. It can find the condition of these pipes and tell the people about where they are, where a leak is, if it's going to leak in the future, how much water you're losing. And it allows them to actually defer maintenance or even progress things to work out, hey, this is a small patch, let's fix it now before it goes bang. We're pretty passionate about this, about bringing the technology to life and saving water, reducing the waste of things, and we're continually improving. The second sensor, little box there, is our second iteration of it, so we keep getting better with this. The logo of Leakster we got is pinpointing the problem, but there's been a lot of struggles along the way getting kicked down and to try and get to this stage. And look, there's going to be more problems along the way. That's just the nature of life and startups in general, and off we go. So yeah, that's us. That's what we've done. As I said, I really like this stuff, and I could talk a lot more than 20 seconds on 20 slides. So if you want to, I'm wearing the high-vis shirt. You can see it. Come and talk to me later, guys. Cheers.
Next up, we have Kevin Leong, a socially engaged artist that works around Australia and Western Europe with Elizabeth Woods. Fish Lane returns them to the natural urban interface, and tonight Kevin will be presenting their talk, Fishful Thinking. Thanks, Kevin.
Hi. So this is what our work looked like in 2009. But we don't really make work like this anymore. In about 2012, we decided that the world wasn't in a very good place, and we decided to focus more on the issues that were really bothering us. So what our work looks like is this. This is a meeting of bread-making machines with local artists talking about the future in the world's oldest yacht club. So as you can see, it's not very aesthetic. And so when Aria approached us to do something on Fish Lane, we thought, yeah, we'd like to do that. The brief that we got was to do something with the road surface that would last 5 years. And we understood this to mean that, well, you have to bring people and their activities into this area. But it was a problematic space to work with, alternating between being very inert and being quite threatening with these huge trucks coming rumbling down this very narrow passageways. So how do we bring people or invite them into a space like this? So we started looking into the history books, and we expected to find, fishing, angling, fish trapping, maybe, fish markets. But what we got was George Fish and steam laundries, and we were very disappointed. However, we found the name absolutely irresistible, and not having to stick to historical accuracy gave us a lot of liberties. We could engage in a bit of wishful thinking. So the design process then became about finding the fish in Fish Lane. So the design that we finally settled on is this one that was based on an image of a macaranga leaf that we found fallen on the ground. And from that we made this 2-color stencil, which could be applied using a road paint product. And when stenciled on in various sizes in this sort of scattered configuration, you got this pattern, which looked like a scattering of fallen leaves on the ground. But we then applied this to an image of a still of a swimming carp, and we got this to a stippling algorithm. So from the second level, you got a different reading, which is this strange encounter with a 9-meter fish. And as you kept moving up through the levels, you got a third reading, which was this one. So we were quite happy with this design. There was a bit of magic in this, which for us was quite uncommon with permanent public art. And the process had gone very smoothly until then. So we submitted the design, and about a week later we heard that instead of 5 years, they wanted 10. So what happened was that limited the number of products we could use to one, which is this product called Duratherm, which, because they didn't give us any more time to work with it, we had to work with a very limited number of standard designs, standard patterns, and a very limited palette. But we could go back to some of the ideas in Liz's work. And this one is a 2003 project in Périgueux in France, where she used the canals, the subjective environment created by moving water to tell stories and to reflect. And also work from 2000 on the Noosa North front, the Noosa shoreline, where there was a story that prompted people to stop and reflect on the people around them and the environment. So slowing down and moving water became our targets. But Duratherm itself presented its own challenges. So image makers work with color or line, and you neither got color nor line, because the coverage of Duratherm is only about 18%, and you couldn't really get around the honeycomb pattern. But what was surprising was how effectively, with the very barest of means, we could actually evoke this sense of slow-moving water. And I mean, we've never actually experienced this view ourselves, but I mean, there's a strange calmness in this image, which I mean, possibly this comes from the lane itself, but it's very much reflected in the design. And from the street, it looks a bit more like this, and it's quite playful. So we've noticed that children, for example, tend to walk along the path, and it breaks up. It sets a different type of visual rhythm that goes against the linearity of the road. But of course, we couldn't quite leave out the fish. And in the section between Hope and Grey Street, where it's not in bitumen, we managed to sneak in this little design. And I mean, this is possibly a mistake. Perhaps we should have just let that old design go. But we couldn't help, but we love the idea that someone up there somewhere can still see the fish in Fish Lane. Thank you.
Next up, lucky last, we have Britt Anderson, who's a professor at UQ when she and fellow architect Mara Francis began the sedimentary city research based on findings published by the IPCC, Brisbane's Vision for 2030, and an inverse archaeology of Brisbane. Please welcome Britt.
This image and those that follow offer a compressed version of Sedimentary City, a project by Britt Anderson and Mara Francis. The research is based on findings published by the IPCC, Brisbane's Vision 2031, and an inverse archaeology of Brisbane. This view from the air shows the river winding through a great watershed before draining into the bay. The city of Brisbane, seen from above, reveals the extent of the city overlaying the watershed where subtropical forests once grew. At ground level, Brisbane's very identity as a subtropical city is experienced through its landscape, through shifting views with glimpses to the river, to great shade trees, to green-clad hills and gullies, and to the distant ranges. Within today's high-rise city, these landscape views are progressively lost. Archaeology of Troy shows city built upon city over time. Urbanist Antoine Grumbach proposed that analysing past city layers may uncover hidden elements that can be brought into planning for the future city. He calls this process inverse archaeology. Through an inverse archaeology of Brisbane, we've searched and analysed early survey maps to piece together this first city layer. Its landscape includes a vast watershed network of wetlands, creeks, ponds and swamps draining into the river within its large absorbent floodplain. The first city layer also registers traces of habitation. Fragments found in records foretell a citywide network that includes meeting places, pathways and memorials closely fitted to the land by its first citizens within a landscape rich in fauna and flora. Returning to Now City after searching Convict City, Settler City and other city layers over time, we find construction has progressively erased the first city landscape. We ask, with forecast population growth, extreme heat, flood and drought, how might the city prepare for the future? Brisbane's 100-year flood map is overlaid Now City, where construction has replaced much of the absorbent floodplain. First City's swamps and ponds have been filled in, and most of its creeks are today in culverts or pipes underground, as shown here. In business as usual city, low-density areas are rezoned for high and medium-rise construction. Backyard ecologies and big trees that create the green-clad suburb are disappearing, and building in parks continues in the name of civic amenity. Business as usual city has increased the number of buildings, bridges and transport infrastructure constructed in the floodplain. Brisbane has always flooded. The 74 flood caused great destruction and damage at a huge cost, but despite the devastation, the practice of building in the floodplain continues. Future planning anticipates higher population numbers and more high-density development in the watershed, with no new significant green space or urban forest to support the ecology, to relieve the congestion and to contribute to health and well-being. In business as usual city, civic green space with 24/7 public access, with permeable ground and where trees can grow, are now only to be found in isolated fragments. Excluded from the count are private property, graveyards, sports grounds, footpath verges, balconies and green facades. Business as usual has become severely congested, lost in its subtropical identity and risks exposure to forecast severe heat waves, prolonged droughts and extreme flooding. Buildings and infrastructure have replaced trees and green space that once supported its ecology and its citizens. Extreme El Niño events will bring lower rainfall and longer droughts to Australia. Heat waves, bushfires, smoke and dust storms are anticipated to increasingly menace the city. The business as usual city will get hotter, will radiate heat and intensify heat stress. As the surface temperature of the ocean rises, La Niña becomes more powerful and there is an increased chance of widespread flooding. The city's floodplain is covered by construction that intensifies and redirects floodwaters, putting citizens at risk. Australia's wettest years on record occurred during the strong La Niña event between 2010 and 2012. Our project, presented at the International Urban Design Conference titled Survival, Implementing Tomorrow's City in 2009, was met with ridicule and disbelief. And then we had the 2011 flood. Sedimentary City is a citywide plan where creeks are progressively liberated from pipes and wetlands are restored and reconnected. The floodplain's water landscape is envisaged as a green lacework of creekside parks linking along the river and stretching along pathways to the ridges. In Sedimentary City, a network of forest parks is interlaced with creeks throughout the watershed and contributes citywide wildlife corridors, shaded walking trails and flood-absorbent ground. And much of the new 4-storey city has access and outlook to this emerging web of parkland. Sedimentary City proposes a future green space in the floodplain to serve the future population, to mitigate extreme La Nina and El Nino events, and to restore the experience of the subtropical landscape for its citizens and visitors. For more about our research project, you can find us on sedimentarycity.com.au. Our concepts and images are freely available online and with your acknowledgement. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Britt. That was fantastic. So great to see how relevant that research still is. And that concludes our evening for tonight. I'm sure you'll all agree that the speakers were exceptional, and it was great to see such a diverse range of topics covered tonight. It's especially great to have these presentations at different venues, which provide new opportunities and new audience members. We have to again thank the team from QAGOMA for facilitating this event. It's been great, and we're really looking forward to future collaborations, so thank you so much. Thank you also to my co-organiser, Chris Ward, who didn't come up tonight, but also thanks to our sponsors, Conrad Gargett, Brisbane Powerhouse, and Brickworks. Tying in nicely to Britt's presentation, our next event is entitled Ecology, so keep your eyes peeled. That'll be in May, and follow our Instagram for more information on that to come. Thank you.